Good morning.
Good
Yeah.
morning.
Good morning, Zoltan.
So if
Kitri,
you
je sais pas
can,
si tu as le bouton plus parmi les boutons du bas. Moi, c'est là-dessus que j'ai un
Oui,
bouton
c'est bon.
enregistré.
C'est bon, ça,
normalement,
la réunion est en train d'être enregistrée. Ça marche. Je vois le petit bouton rouge clignoter et c'est écrit cette réunion est en...
Ouais, il y a enregistrement en cours, effectivement, a priori. Sorry, we just switch in French because it is easier for us for the logistic matters, but we are just trying to figure out how recording the presentation.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Can
Okay.
you hear us?
Yes. Something was wrong with my. First of all, guys, thank you very much for organizing this and inviting me to say a couple of words at the beginning. I will be very short, I promise.
Take all your time you need.
And I'm very excited about going to the next gen weekend, which I understand will be in Paris, and your colleagues are organizing it. So I don't know if it's a surprise to you or not, but I'm just telling you that the next gen jamboree will be in Paris.
and when is it? In January?
That's supposed to be. I will say a couple of words about that at the beginning because I hope that some colleagues will firsthand hear that now. First week of June, first weekend of June.
Okay.
That is the week when we have the council meeting in Paris,
Mhm.
and we will combine it, the two. So
Yes, we heard about it. I think this is Ines who is handling it
yes, yes,
on
yes.
our
So
side. Yeah.
I hope that she will have some help
Yeah,
because
of course she has. Yeah. Not mine, but yes, other members of the association
and
are
she was here
definitely
in Budapest
yes.
in June for the first one, and we were very happy because I'm very pleased because at least 15 foreign colleagues came and like something like 30, 40 Hungarian participants. So it was a nice crowd.
I understand that she's trying to organize something very nice for June, so I would have a great moment together.
Yeah, the point is it should be very informal, very low cost, just really to get together and enjoy,
Yeah.
some professional program and social, programs, but nothing fancy. That's not the point.
Not too much, but we are in Paris, so there is always a bit of fancy somehow.
Paris is fancy, yes. So no need for uh, any extra. But how many people registered for this one? Do you know that?
I think a lot, like 60, no? 60, 70 even.
Yeah, we had yeah, it's around 60. Yeah, so Nina sent the final list through today. There's about 45 and then about 16 or so from the CLA as well. So
Great.
we've got 34 joined so far.
Okay.
We're up to 40 now, Zoltan. So whenever you're ready, really, I think.
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe
Thank you
we can
so much.
start. Yeah.
So, good afternoon to everyone, or good morning, I think, in some countries. But it's really a great pleasure for me to greet all of you today for the next Next Gen webinar. which was organized and will be presented by our colleagues from Paris. Big thanks to all of them. We are very, I think, excited about this topic, the anti-competitive practices in the labor market. Personally, I am very much excited and involved because I am acting as counsel in the first Hungarian case in this area, which was the case of the Association of HR Consultancy Agencies, just where a 2.6 million euro fine was imposed on the association, and there were 23 members involved. Basically, fee arrangements as well as no poaching. So everything what we will hear today, I think, was also in that case. So we can learn a lot. But if you look at the heat map of these kind of cases and practices today, now it's amazing from the States through Asia, also of course in Europe, so many cases. So I'm very happy that NextGen picked this topic, and we will hear more details about it. Also, I would say take the opportunity that there are so many participants today in this call to say a couple of words about NextGen, which is a 4 or 5 years initiative of LIDC, and we are very happy that in so many countries now, so many young members are participating. As you see, there are various initiatives like this webinar, other webinars, as well as there were podcast series organized by these young colleagues. And also last year in June, the NextGen organized its first NextGen weekend, international weekend in Hungary, in Budapest, which was a great success, the professional program as well as the social program. And I'm very happy and pleased to tell you that it becomes a tradition because next year the French colleagues, AFEX young colleagues, volunteered to organize the next NextGen weekend. So information will go out probably in January about it, but first weekend of June, you can already book in your calendar, and you can come together with other young colleagues. Having said that, I think most of the colleagues, who wanted to join or joined by now, so I pass the floor to our speakers. And once again, thank you very much for your work and efforts.
Okay, thank you so much, Zoltan. Thank you, Mr. President, for your kind words. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being there. Many thanks also to the International League of Competition Law for your invitation. We are really glad to be there together with my colleague Anthony and Maud. And we are here today to have a discussion with you about the link between labor law and competition laws. So in short, the question we have today is that true to say that HR is no a real parameter for competition? And is it true to say that HR practices are now an antitrust hot topic? So our goal is simple. We will give you like an overview about what's going on in the EU, in the UK, in the US, simply to explain you what is now prohibited and give you practical tips to help you secure your HR practices. So we will keep time for a question at the end, so feel free to note them as we go.
So we thought it would be useful to recall, and as Kitri said, and hello everyone, sorry, why the topic matters today. So for a long time, competition authorities actually have shown little interest in applying competition law rules to labor markets. So labor markets that's really at the margin of competition law enforcement, but that trend is no more. We can see all around the world, and as Kitri said, we are going to provide some information on the UK, the US, and Europe. what we can see that authorities now clearly consider that the ability to attract talent, and it's a word that we are going to say all through the presentation, that ability is a key parameter of competitiveness between companies, just like is price or quality. And we will focus our topics and our discussion on different categories of conduct. We have no poach and wage fixing agreements, which are seen even for informal ones as low-key mobility, depressed remuneration, and distort the matching between open position and available skills. We have also exchange of sensitive human resources information between, well, it's not competitors, but between employers, which can be seen as competitors in the labor market. And we will also discuss about non-competes, which are more a topic developed for the US than the other countries, as we will see. But these are the main three subjects we want to discuss here. And just to finish on that, we see a global trend to really focus on labor markets. And this movement echoes warning provided by the International Labour Organization and as well the OECD, which had long time ago highlighted that certain employers possess significant market power that enables them to degrade employment conditions and in particular wage levels below competitive benchmarks.
So yeah, hello everyone. I think it has already been indicated by Maud, but yes, for this presentation this morning, we will proceed in four stages. First, with an overview of the framework governing wage fixing and no-poach agreements. Second, we will focus on information exchange. Third, with a discussion about non-compete clause, and we will finally conclude with practical recommendations.
We provided you with some definitions to just resituate what we are talking about. Sorry. So I will not go through all the definition. You have it on the screen. But basically, we are going to use different terms. We are going to discuss about wage fixing agreement, as we say, and the fixing of wages and benefits is assimilated to a form of buyer price fixing for labor. We are going to talk about no-poach agreements, which are assimilated to sharing of sources in supply and labor. We are often going to discuss about naked agreement versus ancillary agreement. Naked agreements are seen as non-legitimate versus ancillary agreements. And maybe 2 points of attention in addition to that. Clearly, for competition in labor market, it's not necessary for companies to be competitors in a product market for their HR practice to fall within the scope of cartel rules. And another point of attention is like justifications such as avoiding disruption or protecting our share investment will not be persuasive where less restrictive and properly calibrated means were available. So these are the general framework we are going to discuss in.
Thank you, Maud. Yes, and we wanted to start with the European Union. So at the European Union level, it should be noted, as many of you already know, I guess, that the EU Commission published in May 2024 a specific policy brief dedicated to antitrust in labor markets. This document is the key European reference source on this matter. It provides a very interesting guidance on how the Commission intends to apply competition law rules to labor markets. In a nutshell, if we focus on the key points of the policy brief, what one must keep in mind is that, according to the policy brief, wage fixing and no-poach agreements constitute, as a principle, restriction of competition by object. Under Article 101, they are considered as a buyer cartel. The reason why these agreements are assessed with such severity by the policy brief is that for the Commission, even if wage fixing and no-poach agreements could pursue legitimate objectives relating to, for example, the protection of investments made by companies in training their employees, or the protection of unpatented IP rights developed by their employees, such as trade secrets. They are less restrictive alternative means to achieve these objectives, such as confidentiality agreement, training repayment, minimum tenure, gardening leave, or valid non-compete clause. So, at first sight, it would not be easy for companies to demonstrate that the wage fixing or no push agreements could comply with competition law. This approach, which is already very strict in itself, is further reinforced by the fact that the policy brief anticipates the arguments which could be used by companies to justify these agreements. More precisely, by following a didactic approach, the policy brief explained that the ability of company to attract talent is a key parameter of competition, so that wage fixing and no-push agreements are unlikely to have poor competitive effects. Furthermore, those agreements could hardly be regarded as ancillary restraints because, in addition to the usual conditions set out by case law to be for an agreement to be considered as an ancillary restraint, which are already very strict in themselves, wage fixing and no-push agreements should be strictly limited as to the employees concerned by the agreement at stake, in time, be entered into for a justified duration, and in space, be limited to the relevant territory. This approach is actually consistent with the one adopted by the European Court of Justice in the FIFA decision dated 4 October 2024, in which the Court of Justice ruled that no-push agreements constitute, as a principle, restriction of competition by object. We did not mention it in this presentation, but it is worth noting that in the Tondela case, which concerns no-push agreement entered into between Portuguese football clubs, the Advocate General Nicolas Emilio has suggested to the Court of Justice to adopt another approach, which seems to be very case-specific. So we are not sure it could be extended to other cases. But in that case, the Advocate General Emilio considers that it should be taken into consideration the specificity of the sector, sport, the context in which the agreements were entered into, the COVID crisis, and the specific objective of this agreement to ensure an orderly conclusion of the football season. And based on those different criteria, Emilio concludes that the no-push agreement at stake should not be regarded as a restriction of competition by object, because the genuine purpose was to preserve the fairness and integrity of sport competition affected by the pandemic. We are still waiting for the Court of Justice decision to see if this Emilio approach would be adopted by them. And in addition to the policy brief, the Commission decision Delivery Hero Glovo, dated June 2025, constitute the first and to date, unless I am mistaken, the only EU Commission case in which a no-push agreement has been found. For the record, in that case, relating to the online food delivery sector, Delivery Hero acquired a minority interest in Glovo, which progressively became controlling and facilitated the anti-competitive practices. And on top of the significant fines imposed on Delivery Hero and Glovo, it is worth noting that no push agreement has been sanctioned in that case as a so-called, not as a so-called standalone anti-competitive practices, but together with all the more usual anti-competitive practices, exchange of sensitive information and allocation of geographic markets. Nonetheless, labor market collisions are now clearly under scrutiny of the Commission, so that EU-wide scope transaction and our business relationships increase compliance exposure. If we quickly focus on the national competition authorities in the EU, it should be noted that a number of NCAs also adopted specific guidelines dedicated to labor markets, and that some of them fine companies for no-push agreements. Amongst the very recent decision, we have the Portuguese Competition Authority decision, which fines companies in the digital sector in 2025 for no-push agreement, and also a decision from the Belgian Competition Authority, which fine companies in the security sector for similar agreement in 2024. But it is for once in France, where we have a very recent and interesting decision of the French Competition Authority, which will be presented by Kitri now.
Thank you, Anthony. Of course, we are all the three of us French, so we are going to talk to you about what's going on in France. And we have this decision Anthony just mentioned, June 2025, of the French Competition Authority, where it sanctions several companies in the IT service sector for non-poached practices. So in this case, we had three practices. The first one was a general gentleman agreement between two groups covering essentially business manager. Second, non-solicitation clauses that were linked to partnerships plus sector-specific gentleman agreement between two other groups. And third, we had also non-solicitation clauses in subcontracting agreements. So why is this decision interesting? In my view, it is because the FCA draws a sharp line between, on the one hand, broad, open-ended, off-contract agreements that are a big no for the FCA. These are informal, wide, not limited in time or in staff, and the FCA considers that it's an essential competition parameter, meaning employee mobility. So the FCA treats them like a restriction by object. On the other end, we have non-solicitation clauses inside a contract that can be okay, but only if they are strictly proportionate. In practice, what is the standard? They must be limited to people on the project, time bound, of course, and justified by the project's specific needs. For example, it could be like security, confidentiality, etc. But the important is that they are not so strong so that they can block occasional recruitment. So this is quite close, as Anthony said, to the ancillary restraint logic. So we had this decision, which is the first one in which the FCA is sanctioned as standalone no-poach agreement. So it's now under appeal before the Paris Court of Appeal, but the message is quite clear already, and we have for you two main takeaways. The first one is document proportionality. If you want to include a non-solicitation clause in a partnership agreement, you will have to state how long it lasts, what covers, whether it's one way, and how it relates to the project constraints. Second takeaway for you is, of course, to ban any off-contract practice. So no green lights between HR team, no mutual veto on candidates outside the written contract. And if not, in our view, this would create real cartel risk. So more broadly, if you have to remember one thing, is that the issue is not the tool is the calibration of the tool. So we would have to avoid any non-aggression pact or general non-poach agreement between competitors, even verbal, even in a very tense HR market. That what may be admissible inside precise contract are like narrow non-solicitation. So I just said linked to the project, covering only who worked on it and lasting for a short and justified time. So this is what we have in France, this first standalone decision, but of course, as announced, we're gonna make a little brief about what's going on in the UK. And I know we have several of our English friends in this virtual room, so we would love to get their input at the end, of course. But what we can say is that the CMA also put labor markets at the center of this strategy, with sector work on the one hand and enforcement decision on the other hand. The practices are the same three mentioned at the beginning. So non-poach agreements, agreement that would fix wages, and exchange of sensitive pay or more broadly HR information. What the CMA consider is that if that arrangements are naked, meaning they are not linked to any legitimate collaboration, they are treated as restriction by object. So we have in the UK deterrence, which is quite strong. There is of course leniency, but we also have like personal risk for individuals, including director disqualification and in some cases criminal sanctions. So the CMA recent consultation on leniency explicitly covers labor cartels. And we have to know that in 2025, the CMA issued like precise and practical guide for recruitment practices, asking employers to threaten compliance and raise HR awareness. So we had this in the UK, and one last word about maybe the investigation that are ongoing. We have to know that CMA is also running sector inquiries to measure the impact on wages and mobility, of course. For example, we have an inquiry in the perfume sectors since 2023. So maybe a word about what's going on in the US then.
Yes, thank you, Kitri. So yeah, the US competition law started to prosecute actually and condemn poach agreement in early 2000s. So basically around the world, the US are really pioneer in this field. We have a significant case in 2005, high-tech employee case, which is interesting to mention because it settled how the Dodge and the FTC are approaching this kind of agreements. The Dodge opened an investigation against several companies, including Apple, Google, Adobe, Pixar, Intel, etc., which led to official civil proceedings in 2010. And under this agreement, those companies I just mentioned agreed not to hire each other engineers working on critical projects, as well as their former employees. And the agreement was made between the CEOs themselves. They discussed by email, by text messages, etc. And these CEOs, so there was Steve Jobs at that time, etc., justified this agreement by what they call the massive investment they made to recruit these engineering talents. We find again that word of talents, key people. And they argue that in their view, this was the only way, having this agreement was the only way to prevent a brain drain to a competitor offering higher salaries. And on the contrary, the Dodge identified clear evidence of anti-competitive agreements that restricted the mobility and wage progression in the Silicon Valley. The company concerned hoped to reach a settlement with the Dodge. And what can be highlighted from that really significant case is like this agreement can have a significant impact, in particular on emerging companies. Because if a new company wants to compete with that big companies and hire an engineer, because of this agreement, it's not possible. And so we can see that the high technology sector remain one of the most conducive of that kind of implementation of no poach agreements, because in this field we have key talent, key people that are really an essential input to the activity of these companies. So this one was of the main case, and then we have guidelines in 2016 from the Dodge and the FTC, and 2025, which are basically the same. The main key points we can highlight from the first 2016 guidelines are that basically Dodge and FTC clearly say wage fixing and no poach agreements may eliminate effective competition in the same way as price fixing or a market customer allocation cartel. Then they say that naked wage fixing and no poach between competitors, that's the term that I defined earlier in the presentation. So naked agreements are illegal per se in the US and can trigger, therefore, criminal liability, which is kind of different from other countries, I think EU, etc. Other agreements, ancillary agreements, are considered as possibly pursuing a legitimate objective, and then we will apply the rule of reason to see what are the effects of the agreements and determine whether or not they are anti-competitive. So we have that kind of tool. If you have a wage fixing and no poach naked agreements, it's illegal per se. The 2025 FTC's guidelines provide actually a similar approach by continuing to state that the Dodge may criminally prosecute both wage fixing and no poach naked agreements, and remind the public that even if criminal charges are not pursued, this agreement may also be subject to civil liability, which is quite important and one of the main trends in the US. So we have several criminal and civil records which are mixed, because it's hard for the FTC and Dodge to provide real proof of anti-competitive object or effect depending of the case. But still, in 2025, in February 2025, the FTC chairman, Andrew Ferguson, again said the importance for the FTC and Dodge to pursue that kind of agreements. And the FTC chairman formed a joint labor task force to prioritize investigation and prosecution of deceptive, unfair, and uncompetitive labor market components. Additionally, in April 2025, the Dodge secured its first wage-fixing jury trial conviction in a case called US versus Lopez. It's quite interesting because, as I said, it's quite hard for the Dodge/FTC to have final criminal liability to be recognized by tribunals for no poach agreement. But on the other way, for wage-fixing agreement, it was the first case where the Dodge secured that conviction. It was a guilty verdict against Eduardo Lopez, a healthcare staffing executive charged with conspiracy to cap the wages of home healthcare nurses in Las Vegas. Quite interesting as well, because basically what we can see from the trends of different cases in the US is like Dodge and FTC are particularly focusing on the healthcare sector. This is one of the main focus right now. And so, well, we can see that that the FTC is really prioritizing this field. I wanted to just add a last word really quick on another trend in the US we can mention, which is no poach agreement and class action, which also is quite different from what we are used to have in Europe, etc. Because you know that class action are more developed in the US. It's a really new trend to follow. There is an ongoing case in front of the federal court in Virginia against 20 major shipbuilding, engineering, and recruiting firms who allegedly entered into a gentleman agreement not to recruit or hire another naval architects and marine engineers, and unlawfully suppress wages. So there is a class action ongoing for that against those companies, which is quite interesting, and we'll see what the outcome is. But it's also a trend. So we have not only Dodge and FTC pursuing the companies, but as well employees, actually.
Thank you, Maud. We will now focus on the exchange of information matter. Exchanges of information concerning wages, pay scales, bonuses, pay rise policies, or talent retention policies are treated as exchange of strategic information. The prevailing view is that current, detailed, and identifiable data reduce competitive uncertainty regarding labor cost. The reasoning translates to HR practices, meaning that current, detailed, and identifiable data reduce competitive uncertainty on labor cost and may be prohibited by object, depending on the context. And the usual mitigation best practices, aggregation, anonymization, age data, independent third party, do not suffice where the data concern current or future pay policies and skills profiles. The message is here, once again, pretty simple. Treat your HR data like price data. If you would not share your sales price with a competitor, then do not share your remuneration scales. If we focus on the European Union, the policy brief provides little guidance in the exchange of HR information matter. Nonetheless, it is interesting to note that the policy brief clearly states that once companies compete for labor, there is no need for them to also compete on the product market to be regarded as competitors on these labor markets. Uh, Based on this statement, we can consider that exchange on employment terms can be, as any exchange of commercial information, regarded as a restriction of competition by object, depending, of course, on the context, the nature, and the degree of sensitivity of the HR information at stake, especially because worker mobility is a key competitive parameter, according to the Commission. Consequently, it is important for legal and HR experts to bear in mind that sensitive HR data could be treated as pricing data in classic cartels.
Okay, thank you so much. Then a little focus about the UK, how are treated like information exchanges in the UK. So on this specific topic, we have a filter used by the CMA, which is quite simple to spot the risk. The filter is the information public or confidential, individual or aggregated, old or current. So of course you will not be surprised. The closer you are to confidential, individual, and recent, the higher the risk. So little example, which is quite recent, in March 2025, several companies in sport content production and broadcasting were sanctioned in the UK for a specific exchange of sensitive information, which were related to freelancer rights. So we have two things quite interesting in this case: the qualification of sensitive information, and then the enforcement by the CMA. I think Anthony said it twice, but I'm gonna say it third. The message is quite simple in the UK also. We have to treat HR data like price data.
Thanks, Kitri and Anthony. This is quite the same in the US. Actually, maybe the difference is like we have several provision in guidelines. Again, I'm referring to the same 2016 and 2025 guidelines issued by the FTC and Dodge, which say that while the exchange of commercially sensitive information between competitors is not illegal per se, meaning that it cannot give rise to criminal prosecution, the exchange of information concerning the terms and conditions of employment is likely to have anti-competitive effects and may consequently be subject to civil proceedings and sanctions. You may see US guidelines are really focusing on the consequences like civil prosecution or criminal prosecution, but it's quite a different things and more important in the US. As you understand, we have criminal sanction incurred in the US differently from the EU or UK, basically. Again, we have really early cases in this field in the US in the 90s. We have a first case in 94 where exchanges of information led to a convergence of wage levels among hospitals, again, healthcare sector, sorry. And those wages were artificially maintained at a low level. The case was finally settled with the Dodge, but it's one of the first cases, really early in the 90s. Again, the US is really, Dodge and FTC are pioneering authorities in that field again. Just to finish on that, again, in the guidelines, 2025 guidelines, we have specific provisions discussing about exchange of information on labor markets. And like the previous 2016 one version, these guidelines caution against exchanging competitively sensitive compensation, or other employment information with a competitor when the information exchange has or is likely to have an anti-competitive effect, and add that, well, it does not, it's not important whether it was intended to have this effect, anti-competitive effect, or not, which is kind of interesting to have. And originally, that's why we put on the slide, the guidelines focus on new tools used to exchange sensitive information like algorithm. because software can be used, and the guidelines specifically take position that have been raised by private litigants across the country in different trials. For example, the 2025 guidelines take the position that sharing competitively sensitive employment data with an algorithm that generates wage or benefit recommendation can be unlawful, even if the exchange does not require business to strictly adhere to this recommendation. So the guidelines are really specific and provide a good framework for companies to know what they can do or cannot do. Sorry, it's again me. So yeah, finally, non-competes. We will finish this presentation with non-competes, which is a huge subject, in particular in the US. But so we will have an overview of the US, UK, and Europe. Sorry, just to mention 3 practical markers for non-compete clause. So non-compete clause need to have a legitimate purpose, need to be proportionate, and we need to not have an alternative process which is less impacting on competition. So to have some word on the US, non-compete clause has historically been the subject of considerable debate, because it's really like a plague, if I may say, there in the US. I think it's the next slide, Ketri. Sorry, yeah. For instance, in 2015, the press denounced Amazon systematic inclusion of non-compete clause, which the duration was 18 months, in employment contracts, entered into warehouse employees, including temporary workers, actually, who are basically low-income employees. The scope of this clause was really disproportionate, really wide, because such clause prevented basically each employee from joining any other undertaking, which was whether directly or indirectly in competition with Amazon. Knowing that Amazon is selling almost everything in the world, this was a really, really broad clause. And the public backlash triggered by the disclosure of this practice ultimately prompted Amazon to amend its policy and to end up this practice. So we have a practice of non-compete in the US, which is really wide, concerns different sectors, and the FTC and Dodge are really as well focusing on that. And you will see Kitri and Anthony will discuss about Europe, but I think it's quite different because it led finally the FTC to adopt in 2024 what we called the final rule, which aimed at prohibiting per se non-competes enter into between some employers and employees. But following the adoption of this final rule, several business associations, including the US Chamber of Commerce, filed a motion against this because they found that it was too much to forbid every non-compete clause. Following judicial battles, at the end of the day, in September 2025, the FTC finally announced that they were withdrawing that final rule. But in the meantime, they had to withdraw because they lost the trial. They make clear that it's not because it was withdrawn that they were not intended to address unlawful non-compete clause. And so they send different signals since then. So it has been in September, so like 3 months ago. They send different signals to the market, clear signals that they are going to enforce a competition law against these provisions. For example, in September 2025, they filed an enforcement action against a pet cremation company, alleging that non-competes imposed on almost all the company's employees, regardless of skill level of job duties, constitute an unfair method of competition. Again, we see that they are targeting provision really wide, disproportionate, because they are concerning all employees, not adapted to their skill level, job, etc., so not justified. interestingly, as I put in the slide, they launched also a public inquiry on non-compete agreements to gather information on possible future enforcement action. They are particularly focusing again on the healthcare sector, and the inquiry asks public for names of employers using non-competes, information on person bound by those non-compete, and all details that you can find in a contract. So it's an inquiry, a public inquiry. They are really asking for employees like, please give us some ground, please give us some information so that we can sue some companies for this behavior. And less than a week later of these two events, the chairman of the FTC, Andrew Ferguson, announced that the FTC will focus its resources on enforcing competition law against non-compete clauses. So again, it's not because there was that withdrawn of the final rule because they were not able to enforce it that they will end up to focus on that kind of clauses. And it's really something to follow in the US because again, the approach is really restrictive compared to the EU or the UK or the FCA.
Thank you. A word now about the UK. What we can see is that the observation made by the CMA Microeconomic Unit is that in the UK, non-compete are very common, including for mid-level positions. So it's like the first observation that leads to, in our view, two trends to watch. The first one is on the competition policy standard. CMA is really concerned about that broad non-compete. Considering they are slowing mobility and weakening wage bargaining. So this on competition policy, but also a point on public policy. We have a few months ago the UK government that announced its plan to cap non-compete at 3 months and link enforceability to financial compensation. Donc, for us French lawyer, it's not very original because we have it in France, but I think it's a real important move that would be done in the UK. At this stage, it's still a proposal, unless I'm mistaken, but we will have to check every time the status to be sure we have non-compete compliant with the UK law. So in the meantime, you will probably ask, what should we do? What should companies do? What should they do? They should move to short duration templates, maybe reserves, non-compete for roles with real sensitivity, and consider any alternative tool that could also protect noble clients, etc., without freezing mobility. So Anthony mentioned it at the beginning. The alternative tool could be like strong confidentiality, invention or IP assignment, clauses, garden leave, etc. So we have alternative tools that, in my view, should be considered because we have like a tendency, which is like more or less worldwide, to considering that non-competes are restricting competition.
Thank you, Kitri. And yeah, just to be quick on the European Union, it is very interesting noting that the European Commission approach strongly departs from the one adopted by the US Federal Trade Commission. Because from the Commission point of view, non-compete clauses generally fall outside the scope of Article 101, provided that they comply with the national labor law of the relevant EU member state. And even more, for the European Commission, non-compete clauses are considered as a less restrictive means for employers to protect their investment than wage fixing or no-poach agreements, provided here again that those clauses are transparent to workers and meet the criteria defined by the national EU member state legislation, which usually require proportionate scope, duration, and a limited territory.
Okay, so before moving to conclusion, together with Anthony and Maud, we anticipated that some of you would probably be seeking like practical, fairly operational guidance. So even though as lawyer, we all, the three of us, tend to say everything depends on a case by case basis, which is true, we have identified a few key recommendations. In our point of view, securing HR practices would require three reflexes. The first would be like zero tolerance for side deals. So in the view of the decision that were mentioned, either by Anthony, for me, regarding the French decision, or by Maud, we consider that any gentleman agreement not to poach between competitor, whether formal or informal, must be off limits. Our recommendation would be to put this in HR and hiring manager training, and of course to create clear channel to reports concern. The second reflex we have is contract what is necessary, but sparingly. So in ad hoc partnership, if we have a non-solicitation clause, as we said, it could be acceptable only if they are truly proportionate. So recommendation to limit them, of course, to a staff, which is actually assigned to the project. Make them time bound, for example, up to what we can see in real life is like 12 months, unless there's, of course, specific justification like security clearance, etc. And one point also about reciprocity, we should allow non-reciprocity only if the commercial balance justify it. So this is for the second reflex. And third, it relates to HR data, to government of HR data. Our recommendation as lawyer, of course, would be to control any external pay comparison, prohibiting bilateral exchanges, and considering that if benchmarking is essential, the right way would be to go through third party to use aggregated and anonymized data and make sure the data is sufficiently old or not too recent or the more.
So a word of conclusion, basically, and I think Kitri said the main takeaway, so I will, I will be short, but I think throughout the presentation, what we can conclude is like competition law has really durably entered HR policy. The golden rule is quite simple here: treat recruitment, mobility, and wage as competitive parameters. Basically, avoid, as Kitri just said, any naked horizontal agreement on that field. Secure necessary cooperation through calibrated and proportionate clauses, and subject your HR data to the same level of governance as price data. It's basically the whole conclusion, and at the end of the day, the ambition is not merely to limit the risk of sanction, but also to preserve labor market fluidity, which is clearly a driver of attractiveness and innovation on the markets in each country of the world.
Okay, so I think we're done. So thank you all for attending. We would like, of course, we would be very interested to hear all the questions you may have. So feel free under Suzanne's control, either to raise your hand virtually, either to use the chat box.
Thank you very much to all of you for these presentations. I think it was a very good summary of what has been happening and what is expected. In the meantime, I can see that in the chat box there are two questions, both of them from a Hungarian colleague, András. One is relating to the market definition of in this kind of wage fixing, no poaching agreements. What is really here the market and how to calculate market shares? That's the first question. I don't know which one of you would like to address that question. And the other one is the very exciting, I should say, scary question, which I think coming up more and more among companies. How this EU Pay Transparency Directive and most importantly, the local implementations, which we don't know yet, will raise competitional risks of information exchange when companies start, to communicate with each other about it. I don't know if any of you would like to address.
Well, yes, maybe regarding the first question, we were wondering indeed, at least for the European Union, how we can define, the relevant market in the labor market sector. I'm not sure there is a clear precedent from the European Commission on this point. We have some works of the OECD and also from the Economist on how defining the relevant market for specific labor market. I'm not the expert here, but I understand that, for instance, for the Delivery Hero and Glovo case, the idea was that the labor market at stake would be somehow linked to the activities of the parties involved in the anti-competitive agreement, the no-poach agreements. But to date, at the European Union level, I'm not sure indeed we have a clear precedent on how defining those specific markets. They could be delimiting, so it would be useful, and we should wait for maybe a decision from the European Commission or the Court of Justice, with a more clear explanation on how to deal with those specific markets.
Yes, I think when it comes to competition law, we always used to these stricter market definitions concerning the substitute, products. But here, sometimes when we speak with clients, of course, they consider, their competitors, those companies which are in their own markets. But just think about engineering, and a company in a motor vehicle or in some other, not substitutable, product market. In the labor market, clearly they can be competitors and they are competitors with each other. So that can, of course, on the one hand, it's a risk because it's cartel, if they discuss, but at the same time, the market definition and the market share, of course, also can be different, than if it was, the typical, I would say, product or service market. But yes, we will see that.
And maybe just to add, sorry, from the US perspective, even it's not our practice of every day, but I think interestingly, the 2016 guidelines provide a definition on how to see competitors. It's not about market definition really, but I think the way we are seeing that, given the specific labor market issue, is not the same as any products, and the guidelines state that companies competing to hire or retain employees should be regarded as competitors, even if they do not produce the same products or offer the same services. So we are not really on a market definition based on the product provided or the service provided, but how the employers are competing with each other. So it could be an engineer that could do actually engineering maybe for not substitutable products or not substitutable services, but can have the same skills used for that's how I understand the guidelines. So it's quite broad, I admit it, but I think that's the way this specific market is working, and we cannot apply, at least in the US and how they drafted it, we cannot apply the same parameters we are used to have for other and more classical, if I may say, approach on market definition.
Okay, thank you.
And there is a second question by Andras,
Yes.
if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken. Thank you for this question, which is really interesting because related to what led the OECD, among other, to conduct all that work relating to monopsony power. Just for those who would not know the terms of the directive, we have this Directive 2023 that requires that employers allow employees to share or request pay information including their own pay and average pay levels for comparable colleagues. Meaning what? Meaning that confidential salary secrecy clauses would be void. So we could consider this question on two sides. The first side is because employee can reveal their compensation or ask for data, firm and employers may face like little less ability to keep the salary secrets. So this could have the good effect of increasing competition among workers. So which is responding to the question of monopoly power. And of course, this kind of transparency we would have among what's the salary of the other, in other terms, would also reduce information during the negotiation. So employees would have more leverage. Potentially, they would be able to push salary upwards. So on the employee side, it could be like profitable because balancing monopoly power. But if we consider the employer side, question and answer would not be so positive, of course, because if we have greater transparency, this could increase pressure to equalize pay fairly and avoid that internal conflicts that would be generated. So it could cause, of course, some turbulence, but turbulence, I think, aimed to compensate and to balance what we call monopoly power. I don't know, Andras, if it's a good answer for your question, but this was my remarks. And of course, Anthony and Maud, if you want to complete, feel free.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you. No, I totally agree with you. I'm not the expert on this particular directive, but yes, I guess that the idea would be that in any way this information, on the level of wages, even if they are shared with the employees, they must remain confidential so that these employees would be prevented in principle by competition law to share them with employees from competitors. So that this is one thing to be able to have transparency from its own employer. It is another one to share sensitive HR information, especially on wages, with employees of other companies, especially if they are employees of competitors.
I think in this regard, what is important for us, for councils, to raise, kind of alert, among clients, that HR people might be a little bit too intensive, when it comes to implementation, and there will be because of the directive and local implementations, lots of discussions among HR specialists of different companies, which is a kind of, probably it will be a time of some risky discussions. So just to give clear guidance, to their HR, colleagues, what they should do under, these rules, and what they should not do, under the competition rules. So these are, I think, these internal guidances will be very important, for HR specialists who are not competition experts at the companies usually. But thank you. And if there is any other question, maybe one question, if somebody would like to raise a hand, can be answered, because now we are over time. But if not, I would like to once again thank you all. I think it was a great event, and I hope that others will follow, by other NextGen and LIDC colleagues. So thank you very much. And if there are any follow-up questions to the speakers, I'm sure that they are happy to receive and maybe to answer those in emails.
Of course, yes. Thank you all for attending.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you for your
Thank you.
attention.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Thank you. Bye-bye.